It's never too early to start thinking about yourself, and it's not selfish. It's actually healthy, and you're going to model something for your children that you want them to see if you have them. Now, I do think we should talk a little bit about some of the obstacles, like
Yes.
the big one, the F word, the dreaded four-letter F word, not to be confused with you know what. I'm talking
Ah,
about fear,
yes.
because I think fear doesn't necessarily always show up in the body as terror. There can be the fear that filters through in the form of excuses, but is fear nonetheless of perfection, of not good enough. Welcome. This is the premiere episode of Insights from the Couch, and I'm Colette Fair, licensed couples therapist.
And I'm Laura Bowman, licensed individual therapist. And today, for our first episode, we are tackling purpose.
It's a biggie.
It's a biggie. It's elusive for some. It's elusive for many.
Yes.
So are we ready to get into it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know for me, until very recently, it was elusive. So I think this is a critical topic for us to talk about with women. I think everybody's struggling with some version of this on some level or the other.
And I think there's been this cultural movement that everybody has to have a purpose, and that if you're not actively finding it, you're somehow screwing up or you're not living the life worth living.
Right.
And so everybody's on this grand search for purpose.
Right. It's like the modern version of you're going to end up in a moo eating bonbons all day.
If you don't find it. So get
Right.
busy.
Right. Right. And I think that's a great point, Laura, because I think there's both the quest to find something meaningful and fulfilling that people really are after. And that might look very different for some versus others. And then there's the external pressure from society that tells you if you're not doing something worthwhile, you're failing.
So I guess that gets into how big does purpose need to be? And can it be something clear and small and very personal to you? Or does it have to have a grandness to it?
Absolutely not, is my answer. I think if your purpose, if you feel most alive when you're outside planting, I don't know, tomatoes in your backyard, great, that's enough. I don't think there's any prescription or any societal construct that could define what somebody's individual purpose is. And you know, from sitting with women all day, every day in therapy, it does look really different for some people. For somebody, it might be, okay, my kids are going to college and now I want to go back to graduate school because I've always wanted to be a therapist or a human resources executive or whatever the case. And I've been busy for the last 20 years raising children. And for other people, it might be a simple hobby. I want to learn to bake and decorate cakes.
Yeah, I want to learn
It,
how to make sourdough.
Right. If you haven't
Yeah.
already during COVID.
But the thing I guess I hear a lot of, and I don't know about you, is that for a lot of women, their kids are their purpose. And there's a cultural thing that somehow is not enough.
Mm.
And I mean, what do we think about that? Is it a perfectly fine thing to say, kids are my purpose. I will worry about me when they exit stage left for college or wherever.
I think if that's really what's in your soul, then that's one thing. The danger, right? And if it is, great. But the danger is that you build your life upon children who are naturally intended to grow and move on and
Yes.
differentiate into their own people, right? That's the natural order of things. So if that's your sole raison d'etre, reason for being, then when your kids go, there may be a really big void inside for some that's hard to fill.
And I think a lot of women know that cliff is coming, and there's a pull inside that's like, maybe I should get busy. But then there's a push that's like, but it's not time yet. I want to savor every minute with these kids and they still need me. And so that it becomes like this ambivalence around, should I get started on me or do I wait? And then also, I do think kids and like family and all of those, what I call the foreground of life, which is like the next load of laundry, the next trip to the grocery store, becomes delay tactics for doing anything that you might actually want to do.
Exactly. It's both a valid reason and a worthwhile focus, and it can become an excuse that prevents you from looking at yourself, connecting to yourself, and exploring what lights your soul on fire.
So I think it's like knowing where you are in that and having a little bit of grace around and just self-compassion for wherever you are in that morass of, I don't know if I need to like really pump the brakes on myself and focus on my kids, or if it's time to begin to put some energy into me.
Okay, great point. And I just want to say, I just want to interject for a second. Not everyone has kids.
Yep. Yep.
So there are other versions of this that I think are huge for a lot of people, whether you have kids or not, which can be the version of, I've got this career, I've been doing it for a long time, but like it's really not what I was put on earth to do. I'm bored. I want something more. Maybe I have been working in corporate America and I want to open a food truck.
I love
Right?
that.
Yeah, I know, right? If I felt like I were adept at that, I would do that in a heartbeat. That sounds amazing, but I think it's probably a lot of work and I think I'll stick with therapy. But right, what if you've been doing something for a long time and you've always had this nagging sense that there's something more or something else? I feel like I relate to that a little bit as I'm kind of branching out from therapy. We're doing podcasting, I'm writing a book, trying to explore finding something else, not that I want to leave what I'm doing. So I think there are some women that might want to switch careers. I think there are women that want to add a hobby that's fulfilling, a pursuit of interest. And then I think there are women maybe who have stayed home and focused on the family, which is certainly a full-time job. And it might not be a job thereafter. It just might be, what do I do with myself? What makes me feel like I'm living a life of purpose so that on my deathbed, I'm not saying, oh my God, I should have done this. Or, you have all these regrets. I think that's what purpose is about, living a life where you don't have these big, huge regrets based on your own development or lack thereof.
Yeah. You know what we're fighting against is what Julie Lythcott-Haims calls existential impotence,
Mm.
which is just that like emptiness, that void of feeling like you don't really know. And yeah,
Ugh, just that
that's,
term
I
makes me like,
know. Yeah. You just get a visual of like a life that's impotent, you know?
yes. Okay, so let's get into this for people so that nobody's living a
No.
life that's impotent, because that is what it's about. And I think we're in
Yes.
agreement that whether it is, decorating a cake, going back to grad school, whatever, it doesn't matter. It matters that it means something to you and that you're excited. It's that feeling in your body.
Yes. And I think that we talked about is getting in touch with that inner creator.
Yeah.
It's creator energy is the
Yes.
opposite of existential impotence. It's where you're doing something that's of you, about you, and you're extending it into the world somehow.
Yeah.
And there's fire there.
Exactly. So, a big thing I hear from a lot of people, both my friends and clients, is, yeah, I want that. I want to be existentially alive and invigorated, but I have no idea what it is or where to start.
So, where do we start? What are the first inklings of what could be considered purpose? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that I think we all have these, and one of these therapy questions that I hear all the time is, who were you in second grade? Have you heard that one?
No.
Yeah. It's like, it's
Who
trying to
was
get
I?
at some core
Yeah.
core thing about you. Like, what were you into? What were you attracted to? I mean, I
Jesus.
remember being like obsessed by like colors and paint and
Huh.
crayons and Play-Doh. Like that's my second grade self was like just obsessed with like the sensual nature of color.
Wow.
I mean, I remember that very, very vividly. So I think beginning to get into those, like, what have you always been curious about? What have you always been drawn to?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it's interesting when I look back at 7 years old, I was obsessed with writing stories and reading books. And so it's kind of maybe coming a little full circle for me after many years of not being as connected to that as I am right now. It's a great
Yeah,
question. It's a great way to look at it. And, I think for some people, that might not even be enough. Some people might have something in mind that's always been their dream, and it's just a matter of giving themselves permission to explore. And, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that might pop up. But I also think that it's the idea of active dabble,
love it.
getting into action. And if you don't know, get out there and do something. Get out of your group, get out of your social circle, get out of your comfort zone and just try something.
100%. And I mean, I think I have never approached it that way. Although I know you do. Like, this is my favorite thing about when I work with you is like when you will write all the sentences. You're like, we have to get all the thoughts on the page. And I'm always looking for the best one, but you want to get them all. But you're right. Like, try stuff. You do not know until you put it on the page. Like, am I going to keep that or am I
Yeah.
going to leave that?
Yeah.
And so if you do not know, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know who I was when I was in second grade, I don't know who I am now, begin this period of like open exploration.
Yes. And I would say, so I'm with you in that my process is messy. It's not the quickest, it's not the most direct, and it certainly wouldn't be for everyone. But I do think I end up finding something that lights me on fire. So when I became an empty nester 3 years ago, I knew I wanted something else, but I didn't know what. Now that I'm writing a book, maybe it seems like it was sort of obvious as we reconnect to my 7 year old self. But at the time, I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. So instead, I took up running, I took acting classes, I took improv, right? I just started trying many different things. I took some writing classes,
Hmm.
and eventually it led me to whittling away what wasn't quite the right thread and following the thread that came alive in my body, that just there was more and more yes in that direction.
That's a great process, especially if you're not quite sure. Now, I guess the one thing but that comes up for me as I'm listening is I hear my clients. I have so many women who have kids, and when we go over these things, maybe you could do X, maybe you could do
Yeah.
Y, and it's just not quite the time.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the 25% rule
Yeah.
that I kind of came up with out of nowhere, but Colette and I disagree a little bit. But my idea is that no matter what is going on, no matter how much responsibility you have, 25% of your energy and your time should be reinvested into self. So you should
Yeah.
be able to dabble somewhere, right?
Right.
And what did you say when I
Well,
told you
my
this?
instinct, I was shocked by this because to me, 25% is really low. And I do think, society is constantly telling women still, even in 2024, to put your own needs last and take care of everyone else. And I'm not sure that's really a recipe that's fair to us or a recipe for success. But certainly I understand the demands of a family. I mean, I have two daughters now in college, so obviously I've got my time back. My instinctive was like 75% of your energy should be going to you. Now, I don't know that I meant 75% of your time because I'm not
Yeah.
sure that's realistic. But if you have a big career, if you have a family who's home, however, your emotional energy is maybe a
Mhm.
little different from your time. And I think it's got to be more than 25%. I think
Oh,
we
that's
owe
so
it.
good.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the oxygen mask in the airplane, right? You have to put it on you first. We all know that that's what they say. I think that's what they say on the plane, but we've all heard that cliche. And it's really true. If you are not doing enough to keep yourself invigorated, I would argue that it's going to actually adversely affect your kids. And certainly it's a massive form of self-abandonment that will affect you.
Yeah, it's a massive form of self-abandonment, and you're right, it teaches nothing to kids. I mean, what our kids wanna see is our most alive self, and that's what they benefit the most out of. So,
Yeah.
I guess, like, 25 to 75, it's like a sliding scale.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
gotta find your sweet spot.
Yeah. And maybe really the message to impart to people is like, if you're at 1%, get to 4.
There you go.
Get to 2. Just like wherever you are, I think the most important thing is it's never too early to start thinking about yourself, and it's not selfish. It's actually healthy, and you're going to model something for your children that you want them to see if you have them. Now, I do think we should talk a little bit about some of the obstacles, like
Yes.
the big one, the F word, the dreaded 4-letter F word, not to be confused with you know what. I'm talking
Ah,
about fear,
yes.
because I think fear doesn't necessarily always show up in the body as terror. There can be the fear that filters through in the form of excuses, but is fear nonetheless of perfection, of not good enough. What do you think?
Yeah, like all forms of avoidance.
Hell yeah.
I'm kind of falling in love with fear recently. I mean, I think I've had kind of a heck of a year, but as I continue to be fearful, like I heard somebody say recently, like fear is a mile wide, but an inch deep.
Yeah.
Like it feels so vast, but as soon as you step into it, you realize what crap it is and that like you can do it.
Yeah.
And I think that approaching fear and getting out of avoidance, all forms of avoidance, is really where people need to start.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what my book is about in the relationship sense, that, avoidance is the enemy of your relationship with yourself and your partner. And you're right, it is fear, and it is big in terms of how it can come alive experientially. But the funny thing that happens is you do the thing that's scary. And right, it's exposure therapy. And then you
Yes.
do it a little more, and eventually it becomes less scary. And then there's a new thing that's scary, and that's how you climb the mountain. So,
Yes.
for example, if you want to, let's just go with the food truck for a minute. Let's say you wanted to start a food truck and that was your dream, but that seemed like, oh my God, I don't know what to do first. Maybe my cooking's not good enough. I don't know how to get the permits. Where will I get them? Right? Maybe you start with baking something, cooking something, and like giving it to your friends and having your friends sample it and give you feedback. Maybe then you graduate to posting it on Facebook. Hey, I'm selling, cookies and lemon tarts or whatever. And that's really scary just because you feel seen. We're all afraid of judgment, but eventually that gets easier and then you're ready for more. And before you know it, the food truck's happening. You just did it in incremental steps by dabbling, by taking action.
Yeah, and I think that people I mean, this is where I think we gotta get into the fact that just putting yourself out there is so scary, like the fear of
Yes.
other people's opinions, just the idea that, like, you don't have the right to do certain things, like, who are you to start a food truck?
Yes.
Like, what makes you Chef Colette all of a sudden? Like, and these are the inside voices that people have. Like, ah, like, who's gonna buy stuff for me? I never went to school for cooking. Like,
Exactly.
and they just the fear just begins to talk them out of even beginning that first step of like making something for a friend.
Oh, you could not be more right. I think everyone probably listening can relate to this. I know I can. That's what kept me from writing my book for a long time. Oh, I'm not really a writer. It won't be good enough. Who am I to say what others have said before and maybe
Yes.
better? And really, that's just fear wrapped up in self protection, an inner part that does not want you to suffer humiliation or rejection. And while it's natural, I think if we allow that to hold us back, that's when we really impede our own growth.
Yep. Amen to that.
So I think the other thing that we have talked about many times that's important too is that you've got to have a disciplined, dedicated commitment. You cannot rely on motivation because that's going to like wax and wane. And if you want to do something and you don't know what, get into action, but you got to make a commitment to at least some time for yourself and the grind.
I completely agree. Like we always talk about, even just setting up this podcast, like everything's a little harder than you think it's going to be.
Yes.
There's going to be more headwind than you think there's going to be. You're going to start the improv class or the whatever, and you're going to go, oh my God, like this is more time than I thought it would be. But
And
if you're
harder.
going and harder, and I'm way more out of my comfort zone. So if you're going to commit to something, commit to it, do it, right? Be disciplined about it. And the people that get good at working, this is like an unsexy truth, right? That if you know how to work and be consistent and do a little bit of grind, that's like the hardest thing.
You are so right. They say, as I'm writing this book right now, that only 3% of people who want to write a book do it. And you know what? It's not about being a good enough writer, which is what people
No.
think, what I used to think. It is about being willing to sit your ass in your seat at your desk when your mind wants to be out wandering and having a cocktail, and instead typing and sitting with the sentence until it appears on the screen. It is a grind. It requires work, concentration, discipline. And I think that's why people don't do it. A lot of people start and they don't finish.
And that's why a lot of people don't do anything at all.
Yes. And that's what we see in therapy all the time, right? Ideas. People have something that they're like, oh, that would be cool. But then the idea just sits inside them with 10,000 reasons it can't happen now. And I guess kind of part of what I want to say today is even if you've got, 5 kids who are under 10, okay, maybe
Oh,
this is not the, yeah, I know that sounds like
that's
dread to
aggressive.
me. That's aggressive. But I'm trying to make an extreme point. Maybe it isn't the moment that you can spend 95% of your time on some project. However, it's not too early to start to explore something, to think about, to nurture a seed so that you can continue to grow and evolve. And when the time is right, where you have more actual moments of your day, something's happening. There's some momentum.
Yeah, that's like really well said. It's like begin to lean in because if for a year, you show up to the ceramics class and you're just learning foundations, and then the next year you show up, and then the next year you have a potter's wheel, and then you're making gifts for family, and then the next year all of a sudden, it just evolves, but you've got to
Yeah.
just continue to lean into it and do work.
And, because this is so important and it can be hard to get started, we created a worksheet to help you actually access your own individual unique purpose. So check out our website, insightsfromthecouch.org, and you can download a worksheet to help you get started today.
Yes, and that worksheet will at least get you started generating the ideas for a period of active dabble. So, make it as unintimidating as you can.
Yeah.
It's not saying you have to pick this one thing. No, just give yourself permission for a season of exploration and following your curiosity around, and it will avail you something.
Exactly. I mean, I spent 2 years in active dabble in a lot of things. I'm not doing any acting anymore. I'm not doing any improv anymore. At one point, I had an acting agent, even though I never went anywhere with it. That was part of the process. It helped me overcome fear. I learned a lot. I connected with my creativity, but it wasn't immediately apparent where that would go. And now, it's tempting to say I did all that and it went nowhere, but that's not true. It helped me get where I am now, where I'm focused on writing a book in addition to doing therapy. So it was part of the process that helped me figure out where I want to go. but I spent about 2 years on that. So I just want to
Yeah.
encourage people, let yourself have permission to just explore and not figure it out. I think that the pressing need to figure it out gives people a lot of anxiety.
I think you're right. I do want to give a shout out to people who are listening and they're like, oh, must be nice to take, 2 years
Yeah.
to actively dabble. I know there are people out there who are like, I'm trying to build a business. I need to make something happen. I think that the same principles apply, but maybe it's a little heavier on commitment and hard work.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's not like I was just, sitting with my feet up, like, what shall I do today? I was running a very busy therapy practice. And, certainly I had to make a commitment that in addition to running a business where I have to pay my bills, that
Yeah.
I was going to spend my energy, what energy I had that wasn't going to my job or my relationships, that I was going to spend it on growth and development and not distraction and numbing, like TV, drinking, marijuana. And listen, I'm not saying there's no place for those things if that's your thing, but I think you can also anesthetize yourself and spend your free time just kind of tuning out. And I think there's value, whatever you end up with, and spending whatever amount of free time you have tuning in and really listening inside.
Yeah, and that 25 to 75% energy going back into you
Right.
somehow.
Not just
Yeah.
Netflix.
No, no, not just Netflix.
So, yeah, let's give everyone some takeaways. In addition to the worksheet, you can download at our website at insightsfromthecouch.org. Let's start with the number one takeaway. Stop telling yourself the lie that everyone else needs you and you don't have time to invest in you. If you're investing 1% now, you can invest 2%. There's always a little more you can put back into you.
Yep. Number two, enter into that period of active dabble. Let your curiosity guide you. What do you continually come back to, look up to, admire? Even envy is a helpful metric. Remember, you can't figure this stuff out in your head. Action is required.
Oh, God, that's such a good point. You cannot think this out. You got to do.
Yep.
Okay. And then number three, in the spirit of active dabble, sign up for a course, a class, the run, the group, the training, the garden club, or start a practice of morning pages from the artist's way, where you write 3 pages, just stream of consciousness, and it helps you unlock your creativity. Recipe development, whatever it is, take 2 friends in your neighborhood and start a walking group. It doesn't matter. Just get into action.
Yes. Number four, this is a big one. Drop perfectionism. Be willing to be bad and messy. Remember, if something is worth doing, it is worth doing badly. I bet you've never heard that it put that way. Let people help you and pull you forward and be patient with yourself. Everybody starts as a beginner. Nobody is perfect or excellent at anything when they start. See if you can tolerate that process.
I love that. And remember, making mistakes, failure, even along the way, that's really what we learn from.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever happen if it's not okay to be messy. Okay, and number five, don't rely on motivation because motivation ebbs and flows. You've got to devote yourself to some kind of committed practice. And if you only have 10 minutes in your day to spend on this, let's say 10 minutes to journal to get started, then do that. But give it some kind of dedicated commitment or nothing will happen.
Also, pay attention to your body. Know how all of this is landing inside of you. You know when you are getting closer to this thing called purpose, when you have some feeling of excitement, wanting to learn, wanting to lean in and do more of it. There is energy happening versus sluggishness. So like notice those two differences, and when your body's pulling you, yes, more of that.
Love it. Okay, number eight, don't confuse fear with an indication that you don't like what you're doing. Yes. Oh my God, yes. So it's scary Every process is going to be scary, but there'll be bursts of excitement, momentary wins, and then more scary. I'm totally going through that right now. But you'll find yourself wanting to keep going. It's so true. If this is something that means something to you, you're going to feel like you want to push through and persevere even when it gets really hard.
Yes. And piggybacking on the final one is it may feel like shit at first and maybe off and on for a while, but it's so gratifying. And this is the real big takeaway. It's like it is so gratifying to earn your own respect, to be proud of yourself, and just feel more expansive and kill existential impotence.
Yes. Yeah, to really feel like, wow, I did something that I care about. I could do the hard thing. I mean, I think there's nothing like that. I think that's what life's all about.
Yeah, being the protagonist in your own life.
Exactly, the hero's journey. Well,
Yes.
thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to check out our worksheet that goes with this episode to help you find your purpose at insightsfromthecouch.org.
Thanks for joining us here for the inaugural episode of Insights from the Couch. And we hope you got insights from our couch.